Is buying a home worth it? Oh man, this is controversial, but I've been thinking. I got some note. I don't know where I put my notepad, but I'll just share with you some thoughts that might startle you if you follow my YouTube channel at all. As you can see, now that I don't watch football anymore, and it's not because of it's not because of protest. I don't like they do it. I don't care. I stopped watching football well before that. So when it's Sunday afternoon, what I do is I do YouTube videos. It's weird with me, right? I know you're probably watching the Pats, who I don't even know who's playing. I literally don't know. I check the sports scores on the on college football because I like to root against the SEC because everyone around here is the SEC. But other than that, I just don't care, and that gives me more time to do videos. So what I do is I wake up early in the morning and I have an idea, and I start diving into that idea a little bit. And look, I'm not very organized. I'll tell you that right now. My head goes a million miles a minute, so I got other ideas I need to finish up on. But this one came to me. I just said, is it really worth it to buy a home? And we're going to start today. This isn't going to be a tutorial on that, but I just want to show you something. I'm using Robert Shiller's numbers. And this will get us to start and put our thinking caps on. Now, look, the bank owns this home. I own a portion of it, and I'm glad I do. Was it the best move I've ever done? Nope. I've always owned homes. I've rented a couple, and I'll dive in a little bit more detail on in terms of my theory behind owning versus renting and whatnot. When you should buy, when you should rent, and everything. But I was talking to a guy out in California, nice guy, 44-year-old guy. He's doing well. He said, should I really need to own a home once he retires at 50 or 55? And the answer is no. I'm not going to get too deep in that here today in this video, but that is something I think about a lot. So I'm welcome to hear your opinions on that for sure. So Robert Shiller, he does a Case-Shiller real estate index, and you can't really see this that well. And the reason I have it small is because there's a different data set I want to show you, which if we make this too big, it'll make the other data set bad. But you can see U.S. home prices from 1890 till present. So he talks about historical housing prices, historical housing market data used in my book, Irrational Exuberance, Broadway books, showing home prices since 1890 are available to download in this spreadsheet, which I'm going to share with you in just a second. So if you remember, Case-Shiller was when they called it irrational exuberance, which he called the bubble in real estate markets for sure. Carl Case and I have collected some of the data sets on prices of houses, which show for a sample of homes that sold twice between 1970 and 1986 in each of the four cities: Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, and Oakland. The first sale price, the second sale price, first sale date, these data are somewhat outdated and of interest only to researchers. So that's going back to some of his numbers there too, but for the Case-Shiller stuff. But they use their home prices to present, not just on those four data sets. But it's pretty interesting because they're talking about resale prices as well. And one of the things that we come up with is that homes don't appreciate like we think. They just don't. And so let's dive right into this, and because I think I find this fundamentally interesting. So let's go to his research. And what we see here is we see this data set, and this is, it's all free, and you can look at it till you're blue in the face, which unfortunately I do because I just love Excel spreadsheets. Something wrong with me. So we go to real home price index. Real home price index. Real means after inflation. Real building cost index. So we're going to show you these two things, and then we're going to go over here to interest rates. All right. So we're going to show, does it get right here, long rates right here. So we're going to go real home prices after inflation, real building cost index after inflation. That's what real means. Nominal is before inflation. We don't care about nominal. And here's CPI's inflation. We want real. So nominal home price index, nominal building costs. We want real after inflation. And then we look at the interest rates as well. He's using a long bond. All right, so let's see so that's what we're going to start with. So he goes back to 1890. All right, it's very interesting. So here's a real, and you're starting with 100. That's going to be our premise. We're starting with 100 in 1890. And we can see what happens. We have, it goes in 1891, goes down to 12% decline, and it goes up. That's a 40% increase, that's almost a 50% increase. Then it goes down, then gradually just goes down, kind of bottoms out around here in the 20s. Then it starts picking up again from basically, 1942 to 1953. It went up from 68 to 114. So from 42 to 53, it went up almost doubling. All right, so that's pretty interesting. It was some of that World War II people coming home, building homes, the GI Bill, and all that stuff. You might remember the song. Papa was a veteran. My papa was a veteran, a summer Democrat. Did he call it about using a GI Bill to buy his home? I can't remember, not necessarily. But anyway, so what you see here, though, now look what happens. Just levels off, man. It levels off. In fact, if you see 115.7 is in 1973, 116.1 in 1984, 113.7 in 1994. So after inflation, 114. After inflation, the prices of homes are actually going down a little bit. Not much, but going down. They're growing at a rate less than the rate of the consumer price index, inflation. Yet look at the difference here between the cost to build a new home is significantly higher relative to the cost of the house from what we saw before. So here we had a 50 as the index, and we had 100 was the cost of the home, which is 2 to 1. And now it's 112 to 88. So the cost to build has gone up remarkably relative to the value that you're getting out of that home. Pretty interesting, isn't it? And of course, a lot of things has to do simply with that, with the cost of all the regulations, put sprinklers in there, put all these different things. The cost of labor isn't as cheap as what it was back then. And rightly or wrongly, it's just a fact. It costs more to build a home relative to the price increase you're going to get. And here's the interest rates as well. So you see down here, this is 2018, 2.83. That's not the case anymore. I guess they're using a 10-year treasury. I bet is what they're using there. But so what you can tell is after inflation, housing prices have just leveled off. And this is really, I'm not sure what happened in 1953 to change things, but something dramatic happened. I just don't know. If you know, put in the show notes for sure. But you see a lot of fluctuation. Now, the Federal Reserve came out in 1914, so you can't attribute this solely to the Federal Reserve Board right here, because when the Federal Reserve Board came out, we had significant real deflation in the price of homes. I mean, we're talking that's a 30% decline. And then it stayed pretty low for a while, and then it jumped back up after World War II. So basically from World War II to the end of the Great War, we had a significant increase in inflation. That probably just tells me that they were keeping a monetary supply under wraps. That way they didn't get hit with inflation back in the Great Depression and, of course, in World War II. But, again, economic theory, you have to look at that a little bit deeper. My inclination, though, is here's the Federal Reserve. You can't say, oh, this is because of the Federal Reserve Board that the prices have stabled relative to the inflation. No, because the Federal Reserve Board was out here in 1914. So I don't know what happened in 1952. You can't say that's not when Nixon got off the gold standard, because I think that's in 1973 or something like that. 1972. So I'm not sure, but there's something that happened fundamentally in 1953, where ever since then, for the last 60 years, we've had nothing essentially but the price of the home increasing with the rate of inflation. And yet the cost to build a home has gone up dramatically. And that's the facts right there. So if you're looking at a home as a pure investment value, you got to think again. Now, there are always rules of the road here. If you were to buy a house, my granddad had a house in Los Altos, California, he and my grandma, that they bought in 1967. Let me tell you, that puppy went for a whole heck of a lot more than what they sold it when they died in 2007, 2008, something like that, than when they bought it in 1967. As inflation, but as the Bay Area just became more and more populous and more growth, populous like populism, but populous in terms of number of people moving there, and more growth of the tech-heavy industries. The Bay Area, Los Altos, Walnut Creek, that place is taking off. On the counter of that, my wife is from an area in Prince William County where the prices of homes have dropped because we got a lot of flux of illegal immigrants going in there. And unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, but those people are bringing down the values of a lot of real estate in certain areas of Prince William County. So the house they bought in, I guess they bought the house in 1975 or something like that, is not worth anything what it was back then relative to inflation. I mean, it's actually lost money relative to inflation. So you see two different corridors. So you can always have a reason. Well, my house is worth 8 billion times more than what it was. On the counter to that is my house is worth 8 billion times less than what it was, simply because of population, demographic changes, whatnot. A lot of houses up in the Northeast, for instance, you'd be shocked. I have a guy I know is a doctor where is he? Upstate New York. I can't remember. Can't sell his house to save his life because it's a highfalutin home, and he can't. There's just no doctors moving in there to buy it for the price he's charging because the real estate tax has gone through the roof in New York. And so for him to get rid of that, he's going to have to reduce his price significantly. And so there's always areas. I mean, but then you have people out here in the North Atlanta suburbs say, I bought my house in Alpharetta, Georgia in 2000 for $85,000. Now I can sell it for $700. I get that. It's contingent on the location. But the facts are the case Shiller index from home just shows you that a flatlining of houses relative to values relative when you factor inflation. And then you take on top of that the cost to build a new one. The question is it worth it to buy a home? And my inclination is going to say no for a lot of people. Not always, but no. And we'll dive into that deeper with a little bit more of my theory behind that as we go forward in that. And I'll get my whiteboard behind me and kind of show you some scenarios why it makes sense to buy a home and why it makes sense to continue to rent. So if you like that, you like what you, I love your comments on this for sure, because everyone has an opinion. And opinion's welcome. Just don't be an ass clown. Some people look at some people's like, you're stupid. I don't get it. Why would you comment like that? If you have something to say it by all means. You don't have to agree with me. But a debate is always good. And I'd like to learn from you and you can learn from me. So subscribe, comments, thumbs up. Always go to the blog at Heritage Wealth Planning, and we'll see you at heritagewealthplanning.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.